Jung's maximum risky discovery wasn't about mental contamination. It turned into about those who see the entirety others miss, and why this capability destroys them. In his medical exercise, Jung documented sufferers with what he referred to as differentiated notion. Folks that ought to study micro-expressions, feel hidden feelings, and perceived mental patterns that escaped everybody else. They noticed through social masks, detected lies instantly, and felt the unconscious tensions in each room. Jung called this discovery dangerous because these human beings continuously ended up isolated, exhausted, and unable to hold everyday relationships, no longer due to the fact they were volatile, however due to the fact seeing everything got here with a mental value no person understood. These days, I'll show you Jung's maximum risky discovery about folks that see the whole lot, and why he believed this rare capability both destroys you or transforms you into something amazing. The case that discovered Jung's most risky discovery started out with a patient he defined in his personal notes. Extraordinarily introverted, intuitive type who got here to him in 1913 during Jung's personal psychological crisis following his smash with Freud. This patient, representing what Jung would later categorize as the rarest persona type, possessed what he called undifferentiated intuitive notion. She should walk into any room and at once experience the psychological surroundings. Who changed into mendacity? Who turned into an emotional ache? Who harbored secret resentments? Jung wrote, "The affected person shows a notable ability for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this school seems to purpose her large distress in place of advantage. She could not have interaction in small communicate because she saw through every social facade. She could not keep friendships because humans felt uncovered and uncomfortable around her. She couldn't maintain employment due to the fact her presence disrupted the collective subconscious agreements that keep agencies functioning." Jung found out he wasn't treating pathology. He changed into looking at what happens when the subconscious becomes too conscious, whilst belief will become too differentiated for social survival. He documented her describing people with startling accuracy. She speaks of others as though she has get right of entry to their private thoughts and hidden motivations. Once I confirmed her observations through cautious questioning, they prove remarkably correct. This wasn't psychosis or myth. This become recognition so advanced it had turned out to be socially risky. But Jung observed something even more traumatic. Because this patient's exquisite perception seemed impossible to explain. Consequently, Jung started investigating what he would later time period participation mystique, the psychological phenomenon in which people with exceedingly differentiated instinct become overwhelmed through unconscious contents from others. Jung wrote in his Red Book Duration Notes, "There are the ones amongst us whose psychic equipment is so finely tuned that they soak up not simply conscious communications but the complete subconscious environment of their surroundings." Contemporary studies by means of Dr. Elaine Aron on pretty sensitive folks validates Jung's early observations. Her studies suggests that kind of 20% of people have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. But Jung identified something greater precise inside his mental typology. The introverted, intuitive kind comprising kind of 1% of the populace who don't simply sense deeply, but understand subconscious styles with startling clarity. Jung observed that those individuals have what he called differentiated intuitive feature. Their brain's technique no longer simply apparent social cues, however unconscious emotional states, repressed content and mental styles that others can't detect. They see the depression behind forced smiles. They experience the desperation underneath assured displays. They sense the collective shadow that businesses unconsciously agree to disregard. Jung wrote, "The risk lies now not in the perception itself, but inside the psychic isolation it creates when one sees clearly what others cannot or will now not see. One becomes a mirror that society cannot undergo to check out. This creates what Jung referred to as the hassle of the advanced characteristic, when your best electricity becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from collective unconscious participation. But Jung located the actual hazard wasn't the belief itself, because people with notably differentiated perception see others' unconscious contents truly. Therefore, they turn out to be goals for what Jung significantly documented as shadow projection, in which humans unconsciously attack them for reflecting what they refuse to well known in themselves. Jung wrote in Psychology of the Subconscious, "Not anything has a more potent effect psychologically on their environment, and especially on their youngsters, than the unlived lifestyles of the figure." But he discovered this precept extended to all relationships. When a person's shadow is reflected lower back through some other man or woman's clear belief, the unconscious thoughts has alternatives. Combine the shadow or assault the replicate. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical paintings. The person who sees actually gets blamed for growing the troubles they are simply gazing. His sufferers with differentiated instinct skilled this constantly. Once they might lightly advise that a person seemed bothered, that character might explode at them for being terrible or growing drama. After they'd explicit problem about apparent troubles, they'd be accused of being judgmental or production issues in which none existed. Jung realized this wasn't accident. It turned into psychological defense. In Reminiscences, Desires, Reflections, he wrote, "The whole thing that irritates us approximately others can lead us to an information of ourselves. But for most people, it is less difficult to attack the man or woman reflecting their shadow than to have a look at what's being meditated." This creates what Jung known as the scapegoat phenomenon. Rather, perceptive people regularly end up the designated problem in each institution they input, no longer because they purpose issues, but because they reveal problems that exist already within the collective unconscious. Jung found the bearer of advanced belief becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously renounce approximately itself. This pattern explains why these people do not simply experience misunderstood. They experience systematically targeted by a pressure they can't rationally explain. However, Jung's maximum traumatic discovery changed into still to come back because Jung located that overwhelming notion manifested differently in special people. Therefore, he recognized 4 wonderful patterns inside the introverted intuitive kind, each representing a unique way of processing unconscious contents from others. Kind 1, the feeling intuitive Jung documented patients who mixed introverted instinct with differentiated feeling characteristic. Those people do not simply see what is taking place psychologically, they feel it of their very own our bodies. They take in others' feelings so completely they frequently cannot distinguish among their own emotions and people they've unconsciously absorbed. Jung wrote, "The sensation intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived feelings of anybody in their surroundings." Kind 2, the thinking intuitive. Those people see mental patterns and expect behavioral effects with startling accuracy. Jung found they might forecast courting failures, career failures, and personal breakdowns months before they passed off, not via logical analysis, but through subconscious sample reputation. Jung stated, "They possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of subconscious tactics that others can't yet see." Kind 3, the feeling intuitive Jung documented patients who may want to sense the physical manifestations of psychological states in others, detecting illness before signs, regarded sensing fatigue before it was recounted, or feeling the physical anxiety that indicated emotional misery. Jung wrote, "These people serve as early caution structures for psychological and physical disease in their environment." Kind 4, the natural intuitive, the rarest kind Jung encountered combined introverted instinct with what he called undifferentiated auxiliary characteristic. They noticed the whole thing but had difficulty organizing or expressing their perceptions coherently. Jung observed, they live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving massive quantity of subconscious records without adequate psychological structure to method it constructively. Information your specific sample is crucial due to the fact each type requires specific processes to what Jung known as the combination venture. But first, you want to understand why Jung considered this discovery so dangerous, because Jung found the devastating effects of undifferentiated notion on his patients. Therefore, he concluded that seeing everything without right psychological integration posed true risks to both man or woman and collective well-being. Jung recognized three particular risks that made this discovery so threatening. Hazard 1. Collective unconscious disruption. Jung wrote, "The man or woman who perceives too surely threatens the collective agreements upon which social concord depends." When someone sees through the shared illusions that hold companies together, the unstated agreements to ignore sure truths, they turn out to be a destabilizing pressure. Jung located that businesses, households, and societies characteristic partly through collective subconscious agreements approximately what will and won't be acknowledged. The notably perceptive character inadvertently violates these agreements actually by using present authentically. Danger 2. Mental isolation. Jung documented how differentiated belief creates what he known as the hassle of superior characteristic. While your best psychological electricity turns into the source of your best struggling, he wrote, the curse of attention is that it cannot be shared with those who do now not possess it. The character becomes an island of cognizance in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation is not just social, it is existential. These individuals often record feeling like they may be dwelling in a one-of-a-kind fact from all of us round them. Risk 3. Identity dissolution. Most dangerously, Jung determined that folks who soak up unconscious contents from others frequently lose contact with their own authentic character. They emerge as so flooded with external mental fabric that they cannot distinguish between their own inner international and what they may be absorbing from their surroundings. Jung known as this participation mystique, a kingdom in which mental obstacles dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. He wrote, the chance isn't always simply social exile, however mental annihilation, the whole loss of man or woman identification in choose of collective possession. That is why Jung taken into consideration the integration of superior perception, now not simply therapeutically vital, but psychologically pressing, because unintegrated advanced perception posed such dangers. Therefore, Jung evolved what he known as the individuation technique, a systematic method to keeping individual identity while developing conscious relationship with subconscious contents. Section 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung taught his enormously perceptive patients to first recognize, after they had been absorbing mental material that wasn't their own. He called this aware discrimination, the potential to differentiate between proper internal revel in and unconsciously absorbed external content. Jung wrote, the first challenge is to set up what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development method. Jung instructed patients to spend time in entire solitude day by day, permitting absorbed cloth to settle so they might apprehend their own proper psychological voice. Phase, shadow integration. Jung observed that people who see others' shadows surely regularly do so due to the fact they haven't incorporated their very own. The greater you deny your very own capability for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the greater disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Jung wrote, the whole lot that irritates us approximately others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but simplest, if we've got the braveness to appearance inward rather than remaining centered outward. Shadow integration manner, acknowledging that you comprise every human find you examine in others. This does not make you an awful person. It makes you a complete character who can see definitely without judgment. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The very last section entails what Jung known as conscious participation within the collective unconscious, the ability to have interaction with others' mental contents without being beaten or dropping your person identification. Jung wrote, "The individuated character can function a bridge among aware and unconscious, supporting to make the subconscious aware in others without sacrificing their personal psychological integrity. This requires developing what Jung referred to as mental boxes, the ability to maintain others' unconscious contents briefly whilst preserving cognizance that they may be no longer your very own, because Jung understood that superior belief either destroys or transforms people. Therefore, he studied historic figures to apprehend the distinction among a hit integration and mental breakdown. The case of nature unintegrated perception. Jung changed into deeply inspired via nature's philosophy, however found how his superior notion ultimately caused psychological crumble in reminiscences, goals, reflections. Jung wrote about nature's capacity to look through social, spiritual, and philosophical facades with devastating readability. However, Jung referred to that NZE in no way discovered to combine those insights constructively. In preference to using his notion in provider of healing, he wielded it as a weapon in opposition to society. Jung wrote, "Nature possessed excellent insight into human nature, however he remained identified together with his superior characteristic as opposed to integrating it into a balanced persona." Jung located that nature's isolation and eventual breakdown represented what happens when advanced perception remains unintegrated. The person becomes fed on with the aid of what they see rather than converted by using it. The case of Meister Eckhart, successful integration. Jung considerably studied the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, whom he taken into consideration an example of efficiently integrated superior belief. Eckhart possessed what Jung called mystical instinct, the capacity to understand non-secular and mental realities that others couldn't get admission to. However, unlike nature, Eckhart nailed his insights into compassionate provider. Jung wrote, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into how that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw virtually but spoke in methods that invited knowledge rather than resistance. Jung referred to that Eckhart's achievement came from what he called conscious humility, the popularity that advanced perception is a gift to be shared wisely, now not a weapon to be wielded. Jung's very own integration adventure. Most importantly, Jung documented his own struggle with overwhelming notion all through what he called his confrontation with the subconscious from 1913 to 1919, recorded within the Red E-book. Jung wrote, "I used to be menaced by a psychosis and turned into saved handiest by using my potential to understand what became happening to me through my work with patients. His advanced notion of subconscious contents, each his very own and others, nearly destroyed him until he found out to integrate those studies consciously." Jung's leap forward got here whilst he found out that his overwhelming perceptions were not pathological, however evolutionary. They represented awareness attempting to evolve past present-day collective boundaries. This attention converted his method to sufferers with similar presence because individuals with advanced notion often face isolation. Consequently, Jung emphasized the important significance of locating what he known as the few who apprehend, others able to attractive with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. Jung wrote inside the development of persona, "The privilege of a lifetime is to grow to be who you certainly are, but this privilege cannot be found out in isolation. It requires witnessing via the ones able to recognizing authenticity. Jung diagnosed 3 vital forms of relationships for the noticeably perceptive man or woman. Kind 1, fellow individuated folks. Jung wrote, "The individuated individual acknowledges any other individuated man or woman straight away. There's a first class of presence and authenticity that cannot be fabricated. Those connections often show up right away and vary. You apprehend each different as participants of what Jung called the aware minority. These relationships are uncommon, however crucial for psychological survival. With fellow individuated individuals, you can be completely true without worry of overwhelming or threatening them." Kind 2, those engaged in individuation. Jung found that people actively engaged in their very own individuation manner, therapy, internal paintings, religious practice can regularly manage superior notion without defensiveness. They will no longer own it themselves, however they apprehend its price. Jung wrote, "Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be recognized by means of others." Kind 3, herbal packing containers. Jung diagnosed folks that, even as no longer owning advanced notion themselves, have what he known as herbal box function, the ability to hold psychological content without being beaten through it. Those is probably mature people who have weathered enormous lifestyles demanding situations. The popularity technique. Jung evolved unique indicators for figuring out secure relationships. They ask actual questions on your observations in place of without delay protecting towards them. They can renown their very own contradictions and boundaries without disgrace. They show what Jung known as psychological mindedness, hobby in internal reality. They preserve emotional stability when faced with uncomfortable truths. They display genuine curiosity, approximately attention and growth. Sluggish revelation protocol. Jung taught a cautious system for revealing perceptive abilities. 1. Start with small, gentle observations. 2. Notice their response sample to comments. 3. Assess whether or not they emerge as protective or curious. 4. Step-by-step increase depth, based totally on their verified capacity. 5. Continually body insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. Jung emphasized, the intention is not to locate folks that take delivery of the whole thing you notice, however to discover those who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to know how in preference to threats to their self-photograph. Due to the fact integrated superior notion serves both man or woman and collective development. Consequently, Jung considered a hit individuation as crucial not only for personal nicely being, however, for the evolution of human awareness itself. Jung wrote inside the undiscovered self, "The man or woman has continually been the provider of the living spirit, the only who brings approximately the change in society." He believed that folks who effectively combine advanced notion come to be what he called subculture carriers. Folks that help consciousness evolve. The 4 degrees of transformation. Level 1, reputation without crush. The primary transformation occurs when you learn how to acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being beaten by way of them. Jung called this aware acceptance of the superior function. Jung wrote, "The start of knowledge is the popularity of what one really is, no longer what one needs to be or fears to be." Level 2, integration without isolation. The second level entails gaining knowledge of to apply your perception constructively, even as maintaining significant relationships. Jung referred to as this social individuation, becoming authentically yourself whilst remaining connected to others. Jung determined the individuated person does now not withdraw from the world, but engages with it extra-consciously. Degree 3 provider without sacrifice. The 1/3 transformation takes place while your perception becomes a gift you offer rather than a burden you convey. Jung called this conscious participation, the usage of your capabilities in carrier of others without depleting yourself.